Doctor, we're going to shift gears now to paying for the cost of cancer. And can you talk a little bit about some of the new payment methods as opposed to some of the traditional fee-for-service or the buy and bill approaches? What are these new approaches?
Yeah, so when you look at the history of reimbursement for cancer care, it was pretty simple a couple decades ago because you didn't have that many drugs. The drugs were not that all expensive. And the amount of care delivered was pretty consistent because, quite frankly, there wasn't a whole lot of it. Now, fast forward to today where the drugs are complex, incredibly expensive, and incredibly complicated to deliver, we've entered this arena where the cost of care, regardless of the outcome, everybody wants the good outcomes that's occurring and even wants them better. There's not anyone I've ever met in government, on the payer side, or among the providers that wants anything less than the best for a patient. But we have to be able to afford it. And the current model, as it's constructed, is not going to accommodate for what needs to change. And what needs to change is the following. It's a very simple equation. If we spend a certain percentage of our gross domestic product on health care, and of that, a ever-growing percentage of that is cancer care, and the rate of that growth exceeds the ability to accommodate it. We can't keep spending more and more on healthcare because there's other things we have to do as a nation. Something has to give. And it really comes down to two choices. We're going to either ration care, where we just say we can only afford so much and too bad, or we have to rationalize care. And something I've talked about and written about is the Goldilocks formula, and that is don't do too much, don't do too little, do what's right and only what's needed all the time. And how do you do that at scale? How do you turn that simple phrase into a movement and into a change in reimbursement? And so right now, the answer to that question is being played out in the marketplace. So you have certain payers, like in New Jersey, Horizon Blue Cross and Regional Cancer Care Associates, using a brand new software capability called CODA, have come together to do bundles. And in a bundle, you pre-prescribe everything you're supposed to do with the idea that a group of experts say we are not going to compromise quality one bit, but we're going to pull out everything that's unnecessary so we don't waste money and waste resources. It might be nice to get an extra blood test, an extra chest x-ray, but if you don't need it, don't do it. It doesn't hurt the patient, doesn't compromise quality, but what it does do is it gets rid of expense. And that expense is not going to the insurance companies or the doctors to enrich them or to make premiums less. Maybe some of it might, but the majority of it is to have the money to pay for the next patient to get the care they need. Another model, in addition to bundles, with the same idea is called the OCM model that was just announced by CMMI, which is a branch of CMS. And in the oncology care model, what it's about is how do you change the site of service of care so you avoid unnecessary expenditures? How do you keep your office open later so a person who may be nauseous doesn't have to go to an emergency room but can come into your office, which is a fraction of the cost of going to an emergency room to get some intravenous? How do you have staff that can navigate patients so they take the medicines they need and not miss the medicines so their outcomes are poorer? How do you avoid unnecessary admissions? Well, CMMI has put a strategy in place to do that. So has Cigna. RCCA and Cigna are going to start an OCM type model. And then there's a final model, which is kind of a hybrid between bundles and OCM, which Dr. Lee Newcomer at United has piloted, where you look at incentivizing people to do the right thing. Now you may say, well, why would you have to incentivize people to do the right thing? They should just do it. We're not talking about the technical care a patient needs. Of course they're going to do that. We're talking about how that care is delivered. So if I'm going to have to hire extra staff in my office so the office stays open later, if I'm going to have people answering phones late into the night and changing the patterns of where people go for their care, I have to pay for that. Someone has to pay me to pay for that. So we have some progressive payers in the United States that really get that and say, okay, we're going to give you the money to do it, and it might be a small investment, but it will save us a lot of money. And so in the marketplace today, you're seeing these experiments, and they're experiments of, in the simplest of terms, how do we change the reimbursement model to incentivize the Goldilocks formula that I described before, but not adversely affect patient outcomes?
Are oncologists involved in this, or is this just insurers and other people, other interested parties getting involved, or are they oncologists actually attempting to reshape the delivery and payment structure?
It's a little bit of both. So in some markets, it's being driven by payers, but the payers have oncologists on their staff that are driving it. But in larger part, it's being driven by oncologists themselves. There's a number of initiatives across the United States that thought leaders in this domain, of which I'm considered one, are actually helping either the government or national or local payers to create these models.
So that's how the providers are attempting to reshape. That's how they're, okay. So what are some of the pros and cons of the new delivery systems model?
The pros are the promise of pulling out the unnecessary care without adversely affecting the desired clinical outcome. The con is making sure you do it and being able to transparently demonstrate to the patient and to society that you're not compromising outcomes while you're quote-unquote saving money, which is the big fear. Anyone can do less for less, but in this case, less for less may mean that the difference between life and death. So this is a very serious subject that you can't gloss over, because it could be somebody's mother, daughter, sister, brother we're talking about. And until it affects, I'm around a lot of people that love talking about this stuff, but the moment it affects a family member, they want everything and the best immediately.
Of course. I mean, who wouldn't? And where is the patient in this discussion, or are they in the discussion?
You know, thankfully they actually are. Patients are really coming together through patient advocacy groups. There's a number of them in the United States that are taking, of course there's an emotional component, but they're going beyond the emotional component. They're getting very sophisticated in the dialogue. Hey, you're talking about me. You're talking about me and my disease and what I want and what my expectations are. You know, in a lot of cases, you can't cure cancer. And in those cases, how much therapy is enough is another national discussion. But it shouldn't be a nation or a payer that decides that. That's a personal decision between a patient and their doctor. But it can't be wasteful either. So these are complex issues that are charged with emotion, that it's very easy to get caught in this sort of matrix of nonsense. At the end of the day, I think you have to have some core principles. The first and foremost is you have to do what's right for the patient.
Some of the new models that you've talked about, do you think it's going to actually save money? And if so, where are the savings coming from?
I do think we will save money. I don't know that we're going to spend less money. And I know that sounds contradictory.
Yeah, how do you rectify that? Yeah.
Well, because it's not like we're hitting the stop button on development. Every day there's a new medication that's coming out. Every day there's a new technology coming out, and they're very expensive, and they work, so they're going to keep people alive longer. So if we're not sending patients to the emergency room, and there's nothing wrong with going to the emergency room if you need it, but it's a waste of time and money if you don't. If we're avoiding hospitalizations, if we're lowering the amount of imaging we do, if we're lowering the amount of laboratories we do, and that money all accrues, some of it, if not all of it's going to be spent on the advances in cancer. So getting back to what we talked about before, the ultimate solution to the problem is cancer never occurring. You know, 100 years ago, I remember a story from, not that the story was 100 years ago, but I remember my grandmother telling me she was born in 1915, and she was a family of 9, and on a Monday there were 9 of them, and on a Friday there were only 4 of them. And that's when the great flu epidemic occurred.
Spanish flu.
The Spanish flu. And that was commonplace. Today, that would be so unexpected, it would make national news, right, if we had a flu like that. I really believe cancer is going to be like that. I think that within a couple of generations, there'll be vaccines, targeted therapies that will prevent it. And that'll ultimately, I think, address the cost issue. But between now and then, You know, it's very easy to set numbers from top down, but it's very hard when you're sitting across from a patient and trying to apply that math to that person and do your job as a doctor. And that's why most physicians, most oncologists are in this conundrum right now. They want to do the right thing for society. They want to be good stewards of the money, but they also have a job and a responsibility and a moral obligation to their patient. And it's the job of people like me and others to help government, to help payers find that calculus that accommodates both of those things.
So what are some of the major barriers to ensure that patients are receiving high quality, evidence-based care?
One is lack of knowledge, and you may say, well, how could a board-certified oncologist not have knowledge? The reason is that the pace of discovery is so incredibly vexing that to keep up with everything is really hard. So information technology, information science, the ability to sort patients to the highest level of molecular and clinical fidelity and report back to the doctor like a GPS device, your patient should have this test or that test, this drug or that drug. That's in development, that's being built, and that will help doctors a lot. You know, if you ask most pilots of big jets, if you had to land the plane all by yourself without any computer support, would you like to do it? And they'd say no every time. You know, there's so many thousands of decisions you need to make, right? Same thing in caring for a patient in today's world. So I think that's one. The second is the insurance model, the payment model, pre-certifications. A number of these factors, this bureaucratic burden we have put on the system, and let me tell you, the people that have put it on the system have not done it in large part to be mean or cruel or to try to benefit disproportionately. They've done it to try to control cost, because you have American businesses that are having increasing difficulty competing in the international marketplace, and one of the things that's hurting them is the cost of healthcare. So, and the payers in the middle of all of that. So there's got to be a better way, and there is a better way forward to try to get out of this conundrum of top-down heavy, cut costs without any concern about quality, when there really is a concern about quality.
So can you talk about the challenges that patients and oncologists face as they're looking through and they're weighing the benefits of the different treatment options that are out there?
This may be overly simplified, but I do think there's a pretty big divide when the intent of therapy is curative versus non-curative. So if a doctor says, you have a disease that is going to take your life sooner than later, and I have a medicine or an approach that can make it as if you never had it, 99.9% of the time in my clinical experience, patients say, give it to me, I don't care what it costs, I don't care what it takes, do it. Fundamentally different, you have a disease that I cannot cure, and I can give you a medicine that will temporarily make you feel better, and temporary may be months or years, but it's temporary, and at some point it's going to stop working, and at that point we need to have another discussion. So it's in that group of patients, which thankfully is getting smaller and smaller as we're moving from what's called palliative intent to curative intent, which I described before. In that group of patients, it's complex, because you have people that don't want to burden their families and don't want to go through therapy and don't care about the length of their life, they care about the quality of life. But then you have other people that say, you know, I have a 3-year-old and I want to live every last second until, you know, God takes me. And you can walk from room to room as a doctor and face that discussion 5 times a day. And so, you know, not that this is a commercial for the physician or the nurses, but, you know, it's almost borderline insulting when we try to simplify this and say, well, you should just save money. You shouldn't, people should be let to die sooner. In theory, it's a great conversation. Try it.
Well, you bring up a good point, because there's so many people at different stages in their life. Someone may be 95 years old, all alone, and it's, you know, their time and they choose not to. And as you described, someone might have a 3-year-old, and so, I mean, what a difficult thing to have to deal with and go from room to room in that. How do we promote innovative treatment and research without, is it possible to, without incurring added costs?
Well, you know, if the computer industry followed healthcare, none of us would ever own an iPhone. Because with innovation and improvement in technology, we're supposed to reduce cost. We don't seem to do that in healthcare. And there's lots of reasons for that, and it's complicated. At the end of the day, we have to get there. And you know, there are so many factors that the average person just has no clue about. You know, we subsidize the rest of the world. You know, what pharmaceutical companies and biotechnology companies get paid outside of the U.S., in some cases is a fraction of what they get paid in the U.S. And that's just the way it is. And it's just because. And there's a lot of becauses like that. And so the time to discovery, when we place potentially an overemphasis on safety and an underemphasis on efficacy, extending the time and cost to get a drug approved is a huge debate. You know, when we're addressing these things one piece at a time, the FDA has done an incredible job of accelerating the pace of approval, which will decrease the cost of drugs. Hospital systems, the expectations of uncompensated care, physicians trying to make a living and trying to survive in this new environment. This is a chorus of stuff going on, and in the context of this, you have to run a business. You have to run an operation. So it's a challenge. It's a great challenge, though, because at the end of it, the most rewarding part is you get to make people better. So it's worth it.
Doctor, we'll end it right there.
Thank you.
you.